the developing story in the last hour that the Constitutional Court has decided it will not hear an application by former President Jacob Zuma for leave to appeal an earlier decision by the Supreme Court of Appeal overturning the decision by the then Correctional Services Commissioner Arthur Fraser to grant Zuma medical parole. This stems from an earlier decision by the Constitutional Court that Zuma must spend time in prison for his refusal to continue with his testimony at the Zondo Commission. One of the parties that went to court to try and overturn the decision to grant Zuma medical parole was the Democratic Alliance. Its leader is John Steenhuisen. John, good afternoon to you. I imagine that you welcome today's judgment.
Yes, of course, Stephen. I think it's a major victory for the principle of equality before the law, which would be a foundation of any successful democratic country, that everybody, regardless of whether you're a former president or an ordinary citizen, has the same sets of circumstances and regulations applied to you. And I also think it's going to be incredibly useful that we've now shut the door on this notion of medical parole as an escape hatch for those who do wrong in the country. And I think this is going to be particularly important that that avenue is shut off as the hopeful prosecutions result from the Zondo Commission.
There are many elements to all of this, but it is incredibly rare to have a former head of state going to jail, and particularly when their own political party is still in power. What happened around Zuma was virtually unique.
Yes, I think it was, but I also think that it's a unique situation where you've really had a president cocking a snook at the judicial system and due process in the country. Even Nelson Mandela, when summoned, appeared in the court in the Saru matter, and because he knew at the time that it was very important that the equality before the law principle is upheld. So yes, it is unprecedented, but remember, it's Mr. Zuma who's got himself into this mess. He could quite easily have completed his testimony at the Zondo Commission. He could have taken the Commission's findings on review. There were very many aspects open to him, but certainly thumbing his nose at the Zondo Commission when asked tough questions was certainly the wrong route to go, and he was rightly chastised by this, and these consequences are of his own making.
John, there'll be anxiety in some communities tonight. It is 2 years since we saw the violence in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng. I'm sure you'll remember it as well as anybody else does. We now have this decision that Zuma must go back to jail. It seems that the trigger for what happened last time was the original decision that Zuma must go to jail. Are people right to be worried?
Well, I think they could be worried. We don't know yet whether he will be going back to jail. My understanding of it is that there is now a responsibility on the current National Commissioner to determine whether the parole that he was on, the medical parole, can be classified as time served. So there's still another step to go in watching what happens. But I think that every South African, regardless of these type of circumstances, should welcome a principle where the equality of law is upheld, because many citizens may find themselves on the other side of these circumstances and would be treated very, very differently to the way Mr. Zuma was hoping to be treated. So I think we should welcome it. I also don't think that threats of violence should be a deterrent for standing by the rule of law, because then that just means that whoever can whip up the biggest crowd, whoever can threaten the most amount of mayhem, will be able to get scot-free off any potential legal challenges that they face. So the law must be upheld, and the principles that underlie the rule of law must be upheld. And I think that every freedom-loving South Africa should welcome that.
This, and you're correct, as my understanding as well, that the Correctional Services Commissioner now has to make a decision about whether the time served by the former president while he was at home under medical parole counts towards his term in jail or not. But this is completely new territory. This has never happened before. In the past, medical parole was only for people who were literally about to coming to the end of their days. So now the Correctional Services Commissioner has to make a decision with no precedent to guide them. Do you believe that Zuma, that time that was served under medical parole should count? Or do you, in other words, that means that Zuma would have to go back to jail? Or do you believe it must not count?
Well, yeah, I would point out that, this is not new territory. We were there with Shabir Sheikh as well, who is still very much alive and well, despite having been granted medical parole over a decade ago. Obviously, we will look at what the judgment says, and what you don't want to do is to unfairly prejudice people. But if there is time still to serve, then we would be of the view that Mr. Zuma must fulfill that sentence. If the Correctional Services comes back with a justifiable reason why that's not possible and is able to justify the time served, well, we'll obviously have to look at that very carefully. But we will be monitoring very, very closely what the Correctional Services head says. And obviously, if he behaves in an unreasonable, unlawful manner, we will obviously take whatever steps we need to ensure that the spirit of the judgments in both the High Court and the Supreme Court of Appeal, confirmed now by the Constitutional Court, are indeed upheld.
John Steenhuisen, leader of the Democratic Alliance, thank you for your time tonight.